Good morning, everybody.
Good
Well,
morning.
good morning. How are you?
I'm okay. How are you?
Just fine, just fine. Happy we could do this morning at home rather than going down to the classroom today. I don't know about you guys.
I agree.
Yeah, hopefully, um, don't get me wrong, I've been in teaching in the classroom for over 30 years, but this can be quite convenient and appropriate depending on what's going on. So yeah, maybe we'll continue this hybrid thing going forward. We shall see. We shall see. All right, just giving the others a few more moments to have their coffee, change from one pajamas to the other one, and then we will begin. Did you guys have a chance to do the self-assessment questions at the end for investments? In the old days, no answer meant no.
I wasn't sure about the last two questions
That's
in the
okay.
list.
That's okay. The whole just the idea is to attempt them, and getting stuck is never a problem. When we go through them in a little bit, whatever you need to fill in, you'll fill in, not a problem at all. Okay, let's get started. Let's see who's in the class this morning so far. Lovek, I don't see yet. Deandra, I don't see yet. Siobhan,
Good morning.
hi Siobhan, how are you today?
I'm good. Can't complain, you know.
I quite understand. I quite understand. Doesn't help anyway.
No.
I had a situation yesterday where I was trying to explain something to my boss, who happens to be the director of something, and it's amazing when one doesn't understand stuff well, how one can really misunderstand and misinterpret. And I
Yeah.
think, I think a whole lot of things happen in that regard. And no matter how clear you try to be, no matter how it does not compute, because when it does not, it does not, I guess, until a whole building comes down somewhere. It's nothing new. It's the same old thing. So yeah, I get it. Hang in there, whatever the hell it is.
Yeah.
Yes, yes. Leah, hello. Are you still there?
Yes, I'm here. I couldn't find the button to unmute myself. It's that kind of morning.
No, I love it. It's really great when you just kind of deal with the little things in life that were like, hey, what the hell? I couldn't find the button. Okay, I found it.
Yeah, it'll be
Yeah.
fine. It'll be
Yeah.
fine.
I know. I know. And then what makes it crazy when you unwind and just try to deal with the little things like that, the light stuff, people like, how come you can't find the button? They want to make a big deal, even out of the smallest little thing. I'm like, really? Give it a rest. We're making mountains out of a molehill all the time.
Yeah,
Unnecessarily, right, Leah Lowe?
it's not that serious.
No, a lot of it's not that serious. What's fascinating about it, as you guys will see, especially younger ones, as you get older, you'll be like, that's what I was all burnt up about. It's really not that serious. Okay, for sure. Not that it's not important. It's just not that serious sometimes. All right, way to go. Okay, Melissa. Melissa, there she is.
Hi,
Hi,
good
Melissa.
morning.
How are you this morning?
I'm good, I'm good.
Who drives you out of bed?
I have a young daughter.
How how young?
She's 9, but it doesn't matter. Weekends are early and weekdays are short.
Yeah, definitely. 9? You're not out of the woods yet. 9, that's when they bother you even more. Just kind
Yep.
I want to talk as a girl, even more stuff.
hmm
Yeah, I had, when my kids were growing up, I had 2 sons, and there's definitely a difference between girls and boys. When guys get up, they move around quietly, do guy stuff. Uh, when girls get up, they do things differently. And they want to have a conversation, and they want to tell you how they feel about whatever they feel, and it's going on and on. So yeah, welcome. Oh boy,
Yeah.
are you there?
Say again.
Sorry, I said welcome aboard.
Oh,
Okay, I don't see Janice yet. Ah, there's Janice. Janice, are you there? Connecting. Jessica. Jessica.
I'm here.
Jessica, you were not here
That's
on
not,
Thursday, were you?
no, I was traveling. I missed the last 2 classes. I was off the island. Just came back last night.
Oh, you were having fun.
A little business and fun.
Well,
So I have to do some catching up.
yes, you do. Yes, you do. Yes, you do. And make sure you do that this weekend before some other crazy things happen.
I'm gonna do that this evening and tomorrow.
Yeah, we talked about investments on Thursday, and so you're here for the accounting session today, and that's good. So yeah, you can now
Okay.
move forward. You should be
All
fine.
right. Mhm. Thank
Uh,
you.
you didn't have an opportunity to introduce yourself to me, if not to your colleagues. So let it rip. Introduce yourself, Jessica.
Okay, so Jessica Clark,
Mhm.
employed with Bank of the Bahamas
Okay,
for the past 15 years. I did this class already. This last portion was somewhat of a challenge. So I'm here to listen in, do a review and to resit the exam.
okay,
So
sounds good.
I'm familiar with most of it.
Wonderful, wonderful. Excellent, excellent. It's really great when you see folk rise to the challenge, no matter what the circumstances. I'm bloody going to do another run at that. All right, so good stuff, Jessica. I'm sure you'll be fine one way or the other. All right,
Yes,
well,
sir.
good.
Mhm. Thank you. Okay, bye.
Janice, I see you just checked in.
Yes, I did actually, but it
Yeah.
was starting at 10.
Yeah, I know, I know, I know. So did I until I saw the thing from Miguel, like, huh, okay, 9:30. So what? There's a war in Ukraine and all this. Let's not worry about it. Let's just let it rip for sure. All right. Yeah. So here we are. Remember on Thursday, we talked about what topic again? Anybody remembers? What did we talk about on
Trust
Thursday?
investment.
Trust investments and all the responsibilities of the trustee with regards to the investment responsibilities. And just when you thought it was just a few little bits and pieces, oh, anybody can invest assets in somewhere, you discover that the whole process is a long, big, drawn out, critical, important client losing process if you mess it up. And so if you're an individual trustee and you have $100,000 in your trust for somebody's child, and because their parents may have passed on or whatever the case might be, even as an individual trustee, you're still at minimum required to put the $100,000. You don't put it under the pillow, correct? You're required to invest the trust asset uh, somewhere. Hopefully, not a risky investment. I hope we gathered that from our discussions on Thursday. No matter how responsible the trustee is for investing those trust assets, they must not be in risk-related investments. No hedge funds, cryptocurrency, and all that nonsense. Okay, that is not what trust money should be invested in. They're far too risky. Okay, and if any trustee is found doing that nonsense to his investment managers or otherwise, I can assure you, whatever losses are incurred, the beneficiaries will come after you, take you to court, and try to get the court to declare that those investments were too risky and whatever losses were incurred, that the trustee is responsible for making good on that. Make no mistake about that. Now, most of you may not be at that level yet where you're dealing directly with lawsuits, etc. But rest assured, many trustees, professional trustees especially, constantly facing lawsuits from beneficiaries, especially in the 21st century. Because 21st century beneficiaries are younger, greedier, and meaner. They are not taking too much of what they think is blah, blah, blah. And if they believe you're doing anything untoward as a trustee, they will come after you. Okay? Unlike their parents, it had to be something very serious for them to come after you. But the children, the new group who's looking after the legacy, they are a different breed. So you guys in the trust business are dealing with a new and different breed of beneficiaries. Make no mistake about that. And I can assure you, you'll discover the nature of those beneficiaries in due season. All right. Okay. So yeah. The other thing we talked about on Thursday that was really critical, Jessica, that you'll see when you read trust investments, is that while the trustee is responsible for investing trust assets safely, he also has to consider. Now, let me just, I know these days you have to be politically correct. When I say he, I mean he, she, like in the old days. I had a discussion not too long ago with somebody, and it was a young lady actually. And when I said, Man, she said, well, why didn't you say woman? I said, well, I wasn't really referring to man, the individual, I was referring to mankind. And every definition that I'm aware of that refers to mankind means male and female. And she still wasn't pleased with that. She wanted me to say mankind and womankind. So, not that it makes any difference. We're all here to do what we have to do, strangely enough. But just thought I'd throw that out so you guys don't. When I say mankind or he, I'm not getting into all that political correctness stuff that we have in the 21st century. It's just the old school thing where we mean male and female. Okay? Equally the same. All right. God doesn't make mistakes. I keep telling people that. Who would listen? All right. So, Jessica, are you there?
Yes, I'm here.
Great. So in addition to making sure that those investments are done safely, the other thing the trustee has to make sure is that he preserves and protects the trust capital. Now, does anybody know what I mean by that? The trustee has to make sure that he preserves and protects the trust capital. What do I mean by that? Make a guess.
The assets of the
Protect
trust?
the assets.
Yeah, the original assets. For example, if you guys have $50,000 in cash that you want to invest somewhere, one of the things you probably do, like, man, it took me 40 years to save this $50,000. I can't just put this anywhere, talking, FTX or something. I can't just do that. That's too risky. Whatever decision you take to invest that money, one of the things you should always be thinking, no matter how this investment goes, I have to try to make sure that at the end of the day, I still have my $50,000, even if I lose the interest or the dividends or the return or whatever the case might be. Because the $50,000 is the original capital, the original investment. Trustees are expected to be thinking the same thing. Because if financial statements are done for this year, for example, and the beneficiaries look at those funds, they look at them. Some of the beneficiaries receive so much money every year, millions of dollars, that they have an accountant on staff to review the financial statements that trustees prepare, looking to see what's going on. And if their accountants tell them that the capital of the trust has gone down by 3 or 5 or 7% or whatever the case might be, all hell is going to break loose. Because in many trusts, that 3 to 5 to 7% represents tens of thousands and maybe millions of dollars, depending on the size of that trust. And they want to know why. And if the trustee cannot give a plausible explanation, you know what's going to happen. They're going to hire a KC. And now the lawyers will come after you, the highly paid attorneys will come after the trustee. And since the trustee has so many millions that they earn every year in trust fees, the lawyers will try and come after some of that so that their beneficiaries can be made, quote unquote, whole again. All right. So whatever you thought was dynamic about the trust business, multiplied by 10 is super dynamic. Okay? None of this is designed to scare anybody. It's just part of the deal. It's the same issues we have everywhere else in one form or another. All right. So preserve the trust assets, but you are required to make investments of the trust assets. The only time a trustee has the freedom not to make investments is if the trust deed says specifically in writing, do not invest any of this capital, period. Then the trustee is protected because the deed says don't do it. Not that you would see that. But if it does say that, then you are free to not do it. Just let it sit. But if you don't see that in the deed, you must find ways to invest trust assets. Otherwise, if you take the assets and bury it in the hole like the OneCoin guy, the beneficiaries will come after you and want to know why you're doing nothing to increase the capital and the income of the trust. Question going forward into trust accounts. One more time. Anybody can answer. What is the difference between trust income and trust capital? It's a fundamental question. That's why I'm asking it again. Like the
Income,
ABC.
could you define it as like the returns that you get off of maybe the capital? Or profits that you make, in some instances, like if you have shares in a company and you get dividends, you own a piece of the company, but the dividends are considered your income.
Dividends from underlying companies are considered income, yes. Any kind of return that you get from investing assets are typically considered to be income. Okay, excellent. What about capital? What is that?
So can you say the capital is the initial funds that that were put up to set up the trust?
Yeah, the initial assets that was put up to establish the trust is typically the capital of the trust. How is it possible, first of all, to increase that capital? Yes or no? Can we actually increase the capital?
I would say yes.
Yeah, you can. Okay. We normally don't increase capital with income. We increase capital with more capital. So if the trust is set up initially for $15 million, and then 5 years later, the settler says, I want to put another 30 million, then it will be accounted for as new capital. Okay. And that's how we generally increase the capital account. Now, in some jurisdictions under modern trust law, you would have seen, or somewhere, that sometimes the trustee has the ability under the modern trust law in a particular jurisdiction, Bahamas included, to take income that is coming in from various income sources and apportion it between income and capital. In the old days, that would not be heard of. But in modern trust law, you can actually do that under certain conditions. So that is the exception. But outside of that exception in any particular jurisdiction, we really should keep income from from the returns on investments and capital as part of the original trust corpus, and any additional capital that is added to the trust corpus. Anybody ever heard about corpus? So far in this course that you're doing, have you ever heard the word corpus? Did that come up?
I think in the original one, the first level, I think we did, but I remember it from just reading it in trust deeds.
Yeah. From reading in trust deeds. So Lee, you're actually reading a trust deed?
Yes, I deal with them every day.
Why are you reading them? Because you have nothing else to do?
No, because I better know what I'm doing when I get instructions or questions about a trust.
Remember what I told you last year then?
Yes, that's the Bible.
I can assure you that taking that piece of advice you've already seen will serve you well, hasn't it?
Yes, especially mostly like I have an understanding for in most cases what we're allowed to do for beneficiaries, but in terms of preparing the supporting documents like minutes to make sure that we're actually pulling from the right clauses of the trust deed to protect ourselves when we do certain things.
Indeed, indeed, indeed. And those trustees who don't take those precautions, for whatever reason, like they don't have time to read the trust deed, they think they know what's in it. Somebody told them what they think they know what's in it. If you mess with that stuff, you're going to find yourself in trouble somewhere along the way. So yes, for those of you who are thinking about being trust officers, etc., she's telling you only from experience. And I'm so happy to see that people still take advice. She said, I'm reading that bloody document. Because one of the things I think I probably said, consult the trust deed about 1 million times in part 1 last year. And it has not fallen on deaf ears, apparently. Leah Lowe. All right. Way to go. All right, so yeah, it's important to understand those distinctions. The other final thing before we go on, for Jessica who's just joining us, and she'll see that when she reads it. Are trust investment decisions made individually? Anyone? Are they made by individuals in the trust company?
No, by the committee, investment.
Yeah, by the investment committee. And we all know, I hope by now, why individuals don't get to make that decision, because whenever one person makes a decision, it is subject to all kinds of interesting things. Group decisions are also subject to interesting things, but typically the decision tends to be better for this kind of activity if more than one person is involved in the discussion. The hope is at the end of the day, we'll have a balanced approach to whatever investment decisions are taken. And it will not just be subject to one person's agenda. Okay, for sure, for sure. All right, good stuff. So let's take a moment then before we get into trust accounting and look at the self-assessment answers for trust investments. Okay. Number one, trustees invest trust funds in order to provide and blank for the income beneficiaries or blank for capital beneficiaries. Anyone? It goes into the first blank. Capital trust assets are invested for two primary purposes. Remember, we just said it a few minutes ago. To generate blank and blank. What are those two things?
I'm gonna guess one is income.
Yes, good guess. And the other is?
Preservation, preserve the capital.
Yes, the other one is the capital. Absolutely. Okay. Trust assets are invested to generate income and for the beneficiaries or capital for capital beneficiaries. So now you see the different types of beneficiaries as we should know by now. But in this case, we do have income beneficiaries and capital beneficiaries, and they are not necessarily the same people. Some persons in the trust will benefit from the income, other persons will benefit from the capital. Okay? Hopefully that discussion will come up before you are done. All right, number two. The trust instrument often provides blank to the trustees.
Express powers of investment.
Yes, express powers of investment. Express powers of investment. Express meaning what again?
Written.
Yeah, written. Written. Okay. All right, number three. The primary duty of the trustees in deciding how and whether to invest trust assets is to blank and in the best interest of the trust.
Does it act for the benefit of the beneficiary?
Absolutely. Act for the benefit of the beneficiaries. Okay. All right. Excellent. Number four, what are the general investment duties of trustees? And we were given a list of them. One of them would be, I said it earlier, when you're making investments, do not take any
Risk.
no risky investments. That shows how one of them. No risky investments, like getting married. By the way, is getting married an investment, ladies?
Trick question.
Isn't it? Somebody said something. What did you say? Was that a
That's
yes?
that sounded like a trick question.
Trick? It's still a trick question in the 21st century. As much as things change, some things remain the same, indeed. Yeah, it's all about perspective. For some people, it's an investment. For other people, it's because they just love the other person unconditionally. And for somebody else, God forbid, it's something else. So yeah, the reasons vary, for better or for worse. All right, so no risky investments. Any other duties, investment duties? Remember on the first page, they give us a list of 3 or 4.
A trustee owes a higher standard of care where it is a professional trustee carrying on the business of providing advice and managing trust funds. So higher standard of care.
A higher standard of care, making sure that take no unnecessary risk. You act as a prudent man would act. Treat the money as if it's, treat the assets as if it was your own. Because, you know, sometimes people treat things differently when it's not their own. Like when they drive their own car, they drive it carefully. But if they borrow your car, they drive crazy for some reason, as if they don't have to take care of your car or whatever it is. Same principle. Okay. Any other duties? What about getting the full information on investments? Why is that an important duty? Get the full information. Is information important?
Yes.
Yeah.
I guess in some instances, you won't know if it's risky if you don't even know what you're about to invest in.
Absolutely. Hence the reason why you need full information. And so it's kind of like when you're dating, don't get too caught up in all the glitter and forget to ask the right questions. Like in the 21st century, you have to now say, are you a male or female? Are you a serial killer or not? Are you a wife beater potentially or not? Are you a, whatever the questions are, you need to get information before you make a decision. And to make an investment decision without information is like getting married without information. You might find yourself wanting, like so many people still do, even in the 21st century, because they don't ask the right questions or they don't get all the information. But you're never going to get all, but you get as much of the critical information as you can. Okay? Investments are quite the same. And the trustee, as fiduciary, is definitely mandated to do this. The duty to do this. All right. What do I mean by fiduciary? A trustee is a fiduciary. What do I mean by that?
It's like a relationship that you're acting on behalf of somebody to take care of something that they've asked you to take care of.
Yeah, pretty much. Fiduciary means you have to act with care. You have a responsibility. In this case, you're a trustee. You have to act in good faith. That's what fiduciary means. That's where we get the English word fidelity, faithfulness, and infidelity, unfaithfulness, from that particular Latin word, fiduciare, fiduciatum, meaning in good faith. And so if you're a trustee, you have a fiduciary responsibility every time you act on behalf of beneficiaries to act in good faith, no slick stuff, no underhanded stuff, no embezzlement, no doggone misappropriations, no bad behavior. Really, Mr. Wilkinson, we have trustees who behave badly? Of course. We have popes and bishops who behave badly. What do you think about trustees from time to time? So, it's a big responsibility, and that's the point. All right, so those are the basic duties of investment. Number 5, under the equitable principle, he who asserts must prove. Has anybody figured out what that principle means? Generally?
If you accuse me, you better have proof.
Exactly. You accuse me of something doesn't mean you're not right. but you're only right if you prove it. My goodness. That doesn't mean if you don't prove it that the person didn't do it. Just means that if you say so, you have to prove it. And that's pretty much how the laws work in the Western world. And I say the Western world because the Eastern world has a whole different agenda that we don't even seem to be aware of. Okay? And it's not quite the same. Okay? And for those of you who are now working on a global scale, because we only know what CNN tells us, it doesn't mean that things are not happening crazy on the eastern side of the world. Not all the crazy stuff is on the western side of the world. By the way, do they have any trust companies in Canada and in China? Anyone? Uh-oh. So man, why do you even ask that? Why I have to answer that? Students, are there any trust companies in China?
I don't really know, but based on the kind of culture China has, I would think not.
That's pretty good. That's a pretty good answer, Melissa. I'm going to throw something out to see what kind of response we get. Can somebody grab their phone, which I hope is nearby, and type into Google, are there any trust companies in China? Let's see what they say. Let's see what Mr. Google says. We're waiting patiently to see what Mr. Google says. Since we all are in Google, we trust.
I haven't looked at Google, but I'm gonna assume that they're trust companies because I read recently about Step being in China.
Step was in China?
Yes.
Oh my goodness. Okay. Well, let's see what Mr. Google says in connection with that. All right. So Leah says she read somewhere that Step is in China. Okay, interesting. Let's see if our boy, Mr. Google, has anything to say about that.
I don't really see a direct answer, but it's something has here. If any institutions fit the classic definition of shadow banking in China, it's trust companies.
Ah, shadow banking.
Yeah.
Yes. Well, that's a start. There's a suggestion. But don't presume that the trust company in China is operating the same way the trust company in Caribbean operates, or some British territory, or in the UK, or such thing. Like everything else, we have our variation. By the way, speaking about trust companies in China, are there any political parties in China other than the Communist Party?
I don't know, but based on the culture of China, the communist country, I don't know if they probably want to be secret or if they want to die, maybe.
Yeah, Melissa, she has a general idea. She says, well, I don't bloody know for sure, but given the reputation and circumstances, probably not. And if you do, you're looking for some funny things to happen to you, including death, and that is true. No, there's no second party in China or any other open. When they elect, there's only one group to elect from, that's the Communist Party. They present their candidates, you select the communist people you want. If you don't like it, be quiet, kind of thing. And so this thing that we have in the Western world called democracy, it's probably something. Does this discussion about democracy impact trust activity? Of course, because anything political impacts everything, trust activity included. Okay, there are some jurisdictions in the world where they do not recognize trust at all. Anybody ever heard that? There are some jurisdictions in the world where they do not recognize trust activity at all. No trust companies, they don't settle any trusts. The law doesn't make provisions for trusts. Anybody ever heard that? No? All right, well, keep that in mind, because sooner or later, you're gonna come across that discussion. Anybody ever heard the term forced airship? Which will be learned later. Forced airship.
I have, I can't really remember the exact terminology of it.
What do you remember at all about it, if anything? Forced airship.
I think that's somewhere of where the assets of the trust. I honestly can't remember the full details, but I did read on it at one point.
You heard about it somewhere.
Yeah.
Well, in certain countries, they don't recognize your trust nor your will. Like if you make a will, they will not recognize it. If you make a trust, they will not recognize it. These are forced airship countries, mostly in some parts of Europe and the Eastern world. The reason why they don't recognize is because the law makes provisions for your assets when you die. So if you say, I'm not leaving anything for my wife because she was a mean person, or my husband because he was abusive, the law will not recognize it. They will say, under our law, the spouse gets 50% immediately without any question, no matter what you say. And the children share the rest, or whatever the law is in that country. And that's it. That's why a lot of people in those jurisdictions, they try to move their assets out of the jurisdiction if they could. If they could. Because they don't want their assets to be subject. And that's why a lot of trust companies take on those kinds of legacies. Because persons, depending on which country they're from, they don't get to distribute their assets the way they want, through a will or a trust. Talk about a lack of freedom. Stuff we take for granted in this part of the world, it appears. Okay. I noticed that somebody by the name of Tanya came into the classroom. Tanya, are you there? Okay. Tanya will speak when she is ready. All right. Moving right along. So, he who asserts must prove. And the answer to that is, again, anyone? The trust instrument must blank. Somebody said it earlier.
Must prove that it actually exists.
Yeah, must prove that it actually exists. Okay, so if you accuse somebody, you have to prove it. In some places, anyway, you have to prove it. In other places, does you don't have to prove it, just accuse, and everybody accepts it as true. But that's a whole other matter. In the trust world, you have to prove it. Number 6, under Section 5 of the Trustee Act 1998, what considerations must the trustees have before investing? A couple of them. What considerations?
One of them is exercise reasonable care, caution, and skill that an ordinary person would.
Absolutely. That is definitely one of them, and that is one of the primary issues, the primary considerations. Reasonable care, definitely. What's another one? What's another one?
Have regard to the suitability of the trust investment in the context of the whole of the trust property with a view to obtaining an overall balance of risk and return
Absolutely,
reasonably suited to the trust.
absolutely. So this is why we have committees for these things. Because depending on the size of the trust, doesn't matter if it's small, medium, or large, but the larger the trust and the legacy is, there are far more things to consider in terms of suitability. And everything has to be considered in terms of the entire trust asset portfolio. not just the cash position or the real estate position or the paintings or whatever the assets are. The whole picture has to be considered. And the big question is, this investment that we're planning to make, is it suitable? And what makes it suitable? Certainly one that is less risky and will provide the highest returns without putting the capital in jeopardy. Those are what we consider to be suitability issues for the trustee. Okay? Remember, the trustee is not required to make investments the same way private banks make them, or investment banks make them, or some investment manager somewhere who's strung out on getting the highest return because the highest return is going to result in more money in the investment manager's pocket and all this kind of stuff. That's not how trust decisions are supposed to be made. Okay? That's what we mean by suitability. And then there's a third consideration. What is that?
Just the need for diversification.
Yes, diversification. Does anybody know what that means? Diversification?
Not putting all your eggs in one basket, making sure you invest in different segments.
Yeah, not putting all of your eggs in one basket. Imagine that, okay? So, again, notice all of these considerations are designed to do what? To provide the greatest possible protection to the beneficiary's asset. Trustees know this very well because they know if they put the assets in jeopardy, that they could be sued, and whatever the decision is made by the court, they would have to take the money out of their own accounts to make good on the decision that the court makes. And as we all know, you have an appeal in court, but typically the court decision is final. All right. I see Lovette walked in. Lovette, is that you?
Yes, it is.
Yeah, how are you today?
I'm okay. Just listening in because I didn't get to do the questions.
That's fine. That's fine. Just tuck them in and you can look at the veracity of the responses later when you get a moment.
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you.
Problem at all. No problem at all. Number 7. What is the standard of care required under Section 5 of the Trustee Act 1998? Couple of standards given. The standard of care. What things do you consider? I'll give you the first one. Ensure that the investment is appropriate. That's the first standard of care. Any others? Number 2, consider the size of the trust assets. Would be the second standard under Section 5. Number 3, consider the economic conditions at the time the investment is being made. And last but not least, consider the settlor's wishes. Now, let me just say this. It's interesting, like many other disciplines, how things interconnect, even though we study them individually. We're studying trust investments from Thursday, this review, and yet a reference is made to the settlor's wishes. Does anybody know what the conversation is about the settlor's wishes? What is that all about? Like, how did that come up in the investment side? What is that? The settlor's wishes.
Isn't that related to the trustees?
It is? In what way?
Basically, well, you say the settler wishes, so I guess it would state the wishes that the settler wants how the settler wants the trust to be set up upon his death. With the,
Yeah.
I mean, in terms of like to benefit the beneficiaries, like what he would want to leave behind to who and all those things.
Yes. The settler's wishes is kind of like instructions from the grave, so to speak, unless of course it's a living trust where the settler is still alive. But typically, and then the settler's wishes would not necessarily be a big deal because the person is still alive and makes a noise. But once the settler dies, the trust is strictly in the hands of the trustee. Most trust settlements tend to be accompanied by a settler's letter of wishes, whereby the settler says pretty much, "Dear Mr. Trustee, I have left my assets in trust with you for the benefit of my beneficiaries. However, the following is what my wishes are with regards to how you should generally administer this trust on my behalf. Please ensure that my spouse is taken care of at all costs or not. Please ensure my children is taken care of at all costs or not. Please note that it is my desire that only the cat benefits from my money and the rest goes to charity once the cat and all the cat's litter are passed on," whatever the case might be. Those are the wishes that the settler would normally create for every settlement, at least most of them. Is the trustee bound by these letters of wishes, anyone? Is it a must that the trustee follow them?
No,
Right.
it's not.
No, it's not. Okay, it's not. There's no law that says the trustee is bound legally to follow those wishes. Oftentimes, many trustees don't follow any of those wishes, but hopefully many of them do take into account the settler's wishes. Okay? But that's a whole other discussion. But typically, letters of wishes are common amongst trust documents in terms of what the settler would like to see the trustee do generally with regards to the administration of his or her assets. Okay, letter of wishes. Okay, it's just like when you guys accumulate some wealth and then you're leaving it to whomever you're leaving it to, and then you say to somebody or leave something in writing that says, "Please make sure that my children get everything and the other people don't get anything," and whatever the case might be. And depending on who's administering that trust, unless it's written into the will of trust, they may or may not follow through. The hope is, though, that they will look at your letter, similar to a letter of wishes, and say, "You know what? Siobhan is my girl. I'm going to listen to her and do what she says." And then the other person will say, "I didn't like her anyway. I'm not doing any of those things. And she's dead. She can't do me anything." These things happen in the trust world as well. Okay. And in other areas connected to these things. So these are very real issues. That's really the point I'm making. It's not just all academic to get through an examination. In the real world, these things are real. The only difference is they're more intense than the stuff that is on paper. All right, number 8. Section 13 of the blank allows the trustee the protection of law for any liability for loss occasioned by the trust, where such trustee has acted on the instructions or directions of a power holder, quote unquote, or failed to act in the absence of a direction from a power holder with responsibility for investment. Okay, that should be an easy one. Section 13 of the
Trustee Amendment,
Trustee Amendment Act of 2000
11.
yes, 2011. Okay. For those of you who have been taking a look at the Trustee Act, of course, you're not necessarily going to get through all that this semester. It's kind of a point of reference, but you do want to look at the topical issues, see what's in it. Look to see wherever's reference is made in your sessions like this and other ones, that you go to that section of the act and read that section quickly and see if it really does relate to the discussion at hand, so that you have an idea not only that this thing exists, but where, and stuff like that. Okay? That's what prudent students do. See that we're prudent. Okay. Number 9. With regards to legal protections under the law, a trustee will only be afforded such protections if they have properly discharged their obligations with regards to their blank. The investment advisor and the blank of such advisors to ensure that such agents act in accordance with the provisions of the trust and with the same objectives of preserving and protecting trust property from needless loss. Okay, first line.
Selection or appointment.
Yes, selection or appointment, and the
Continuing supervision.
continuing supervision. In other words, it's not good enough just to select a great set of investment advisors, one or more, but you have to watch them, check them, and get updates from them on a regular basis to make sure that they are acting in accordance with your strategies. Remember those written strategies we talked about? And are not doing anything untoward. Because sometimes you hire folks to do stuff and they sometimes end up doing some other stuff. And if you're not continuously checking, you might be in for a surprise. Remember, what is the objective of all this stuff? To prevent needless loss. An important point to remember from a trust investment perspective is that then we're not unrealistic to think that some losses will not occur. Sometimes that happens because it's beyond the control of anybody. And if any lawsuits are brought and you can prove that it was beyond the control of the trustee and his investment people, then typically the courts are not unreasonable. They will recognize this for the most part. The key is to stay away from what we call, what kind of loss again? What kind of losses should we avoid as a trustee?
Needless loss.
Yeah, needless. We can't avoid all losses, but the needless ones, we have to find a way to avoid, or else you know who will come after you. The vultures called beneficiaries. And some of them have good cases. When I say they're vultures, that doesn't mean that they don't always have a good case. They don't always have a good case, but sometimes they do. Because God forbid, not all trustees act in good faith. Not all trustees are the fiduciaries they're supposed to be. Unfortunately, but that's the way it is. Okay, we strive to do it, but not everybody conforms. Right? Anything else? Number 10. Finally, once the investment strategy has been created and executed, the trustee must ensure that there are blank of the investments and the investment strategy in order to detect any changes in such investments which may cause needless loss. The answer is
Periodic reviews.
sorry, say it again.
Periodic reviews.
Yeah, periodic reviews again. There's no substitute, in other words, for checking. Those of you who have little children, or not so little, even if they're 9 or 10 or 13, we know that if they get too quiet, maybe we need to check. We know if they say they've done their homework, we don't just take their word for it, or certainly we shouldn't. We need to make sure they do their homework. And the principle behind it is the same for the trustee. You have all these multi-millions of dollars that you hold in trust as a fiduciary. There's no question that you need to make sure by checking, no guessing, checking, make sure that everything is in order. All right. So now then, having beaten the trust investment to death, and there's a reason why I kind of beat it to death, because it is such an important part of the trustee's responsibility. And it's often the part of the trustee's responsibility where they get a lot of heat in terms of how they're managing and investing those trust assets. Okay? And some of you will probably see some of that eventually somewhere along the way, depending on where you end up in the world of trust. Okay? Because as you can see, the trust world is very diversified. Okay, trustees of a legal area department, trustees have an accounting department, trustees have an investment department, trustees have those persons administrative department. And so there are a whole lot of things going on to make the trust organization work. And the bigger it is, the more pieces it has attached to it, so that all of the requirements of the trustee and the trust can be met. And the objective, of course, is to meet those requirements and to keep lawsuits and discourse to a minimum. God forbid. All right. So now we can look at the other part of the trust world called trust accounting. Now, in this particular section, we are not going to be dealing with the debits and credits of trust accounting. I wouldn't say that's the easy part. That's just the other part of trust accounting. We'll be dealing more with the trustee's responsibility with regards to accounting for trust assets. And so, as opposed to the more pedagogical version of debits and credits and financial statements, etc., capital income accounts that need to be prepared in some form or another, we'll be looking more of it at it from a more conceptual point of view in terms of the trustee's duties and responsibilities to account. Okay? So that's the thing to keep in mind for this aspect of trust accounting. The trust accountants will do all of that other crazy stuff, but this conceptual side is for the administrators of the trust. All right, the leaders of the world and others in the class who are could eventually be reading trust deeds and looking at stuff with accounting implications, but not necessarily doing the accounting work. All right, so here we go. What are the objectives of this particular section? Can anybody say? There are 4 of them. What are the 4 objectives that we are going to look at? One, two, three, 4. What are they?
Understand the trustees' duties in relation to trust accounting.
Hmm?
Learn the fundamentals of trust accounts.
Yeah.
Apply their knowledge of trust account to practical trust issues.
And
4th one, communicate their knowledge of trust accounting effectively.
yeah. So when I say to you guys, can somebody read that? I'm not just trying to make you miserable for the hell of it and all that stuff, because as you can see, it's not only enough to understand it, but at some point you need to be able to communicate it with some degree of confidence, and that communication is not always in writing. Sometimes that communication is verbal, oftentimes it's verbal, because people are talking all the time about stuff. And you never know in your capacity as a trust officer administrator when you'll be called upon to talk out of the context of your necessary work from day to day with people you're familiar with. Okay. So all of a sudden it goes from all this academic stuff to chit chat. Yeah, they're all interconnected stuff that makes this thing work. All right, and make things work for individuals who work in this field. So let us begin then with the discussion on what we call the duty to account, another duty. When was the last time you heard about the word duty, class? It wasn't too long ago. The duty to what?
Invest.
Yeah, the duty to invest. Thank you very much. So now we have the duty to account. And so let's take a look at this duty to account and see what other misery has been bestowed upon trustees for all those fees that they collect every year for the administration of the trust. Now, your text opens up very clearly by saying, very clearly, they make no doubt about it, makes no doubt about it. Trustees have a general duty to account, period, with regards to trust assets. And the reason they have to account is because of their, say that word again, fiduciary nature as trustee. Simple as that. Remember what fiduciary means? Anybody remembers again? What does fiduciary mean? To act what? To act in,
Good
Good.
faith.
yes, to act in good faith. Okay? And to act in good faith generally means very simply to do the right thing. It's not complicated. The right thing is never complicated. Most of the complications of the world, if you're not aware of it yet, are based on wrong things. Certainly it's been my experience for the last million years that I've been working everywhere in the world. Okay? I've discovered that doing the right thing is very simple. Things only get complicated when we start doing the wrong and unacceptable things, no matter what. Okay? So this issue of fiduciary is very fundamental to the trustee. Okay? And the word trustee didn't come up by accident. I hope you know by now, trustee comes from the word trust. And trust means being able to take the word of somebody who say they'll do what they say they're going to do, or they'll do what they agree with you to do. That's why when things do not go as planned, we say, I don't trust you anymore. And therefore, even if you tell me the truth from here on and into the end, I still don't know if I'm going to believe you if I could. That's how serious this issue of trust is. And it's no different for a trustee. Okay, professional trustee or individual trustee. We still all have this fiduciary responsibility. And one of them, like investments, is to account for the assets. All right. The trustee must ensure, again, see, the preservation, they call it the P&P. What is the P&P of trustees? Anyone again? P&P?
Preservation and protection.
Yes, preservation and protection of trust property. Wow. Simple statement, deep implications. Let me ask you guys a question about P&P. Not PLP, P and P. The trustee general. Who is responsible for the P&P of the Bahamas? The country called the Bahamas. Who's responsible for the P&P of the Bahamas?
Central Bank.
I wish, but you're getting warm. They're responsible for the financial P&P, but I'm talking about the country as a whole, overall.
Government.
Who?
The government.
Yes. Now we know that all of us are players in the whole scheme of things, but we in the Bahamas, like other countries where they're democracies, we select a government through the voting process. And just like setting up a trust, we feel that we should be able to trust the government that we have selected. And so by extension, governments of a country, including ours, are like trustees that we would like to trust. Just like beneficiaries, we're the beneficiaries, the government we select are the trustees, and we would like to believe that they are acting prudently and as fiduciary for the long-term benefit of the country. That's an interesting analogy, but it is in fact so. So this P&P thing goes very deep. And part of P&P is preserving the assets primarily of the trust. P&P of governments, well, assets are a big part of it. But there are some other things as well. But the point is made. Okay? This P&P, preservation and protection, that comes under the duty to account once again raises its head. Remember, under investments, we saw P&P, preservation and protection. Now we're down into the duty of accounts, accounts, and we see P&P again. Such that this preservation and protection of property from an accounting perspective has to do with making sure that all income that can be generated for the trust is generated, and that all capital that can grow the capital account is properly sought after and properly accounted for. And that we make sure that we keep always an account of all income, all capital, and the entire asset base of the trust. Now, that raises another question. Can somebody say what are some of the types of assets that might be within a trust? What types of assets might be within a trust?
Real estate,
Real estate, of course.
stocks and bonds,
Stocks and bonds, of course.
Art, jewelry,
Art, expensive art, non-expensive art, jewelry,
cars, boats,
cars,
planes.
boats, planes. Just about anything we can think of value, yes? Potentially can be a part of the trust assets. And so those trustees, for example, who have expensive art, they might have 3 paintings, for example, in trust, but the 3 paintings together are worth $300 million. Imagine being responsible for that. 3 paintings, $100 million each. Like, how do you protect those paintings from being stolen? Well, that's the trustee's job. Are there any investment possibilities for holding that kind of asset? Well, committee has to sit down and see if there are any. There might be none. Your biggest responsibility might just be security. Protecting those 3 paintings, $300 million. Who are the beneficiaries? Not necessarily any individuals. The beneficiaries might be the state, the museum, the whomever the settler designate the beneficiary to be. So the point I'm making is a trust may not necessarily always be as vanilla as we think. The typical trust with some real estate, some cash, and some disbursements that we make to beneficiaries every year. They're not, many of them are that way, but they're not all that way. Okay? Some trusts are very complex and are very unique, and many of them are not vanilla. They have all kinds of subtleties and all kinds of weird and interesting assets attached to them. And those trustees who take on that responsibility need to be sure that they have the ability and capability of dealing with certain types of assets. Okay? So this duty of accounts now extends pretty much as the duty to invest. Okay? In order to meet the needs of beneficiaries, this accounting must be done. Why? Because usually most trustees and most trust laws make it pretty much mandatory that beneficiaries are allowed to see financial information of the trust. The trustee cannot refuse to give beneficiaries financial information. In fact, in 99% of the cases, they're required to provide it. And to provide it truthfully, honestly, and consistently, and even on demand. So even though it might not be the financial year, to send statements out to beneficiaries, or beneficiary pops in anytime and say, I'd like to see the records, the trustee has a duty to provide them with the records. Does anybody remember which documents the trustee is not bound by law to show beneficiaries?
The minutes.
The minutes of the trust, okay? Outside of the minutes, trustees are pretty much required to respond to most questions that beneficiaries have, except for minutes of the trust. Courts still protect the trustees' right to minutes, so far. Okay? Most cases and that doesn't stop beneficiaries from trying to get access from time to time. They want to see how the trustee is thinking, so they can probably see if they're moving in the right way, if they can sue them for anything, whatever the case might be. But today, most courts, at least in trust jurisdictions, typically still allow trustees to maintain exclusive right to their minutes. That doesn't mean the trustee does not have to do minutes. They have to. That's a duty as well, to maintain the minutes, but they just do not have to show them to the beneficiaries. That's like somebody reading your mind. And I guess even the courts realize that, like anything else, if people could read other people's minds, the world would be in 10 times more chaos than it is. And so I suppose that's the same principle. All right, so this duty to account is pretty much like the duty to invest. And so now we're going to spend the remaining time seeing what kinds of things the trustees consider with this duty to account. All right. Clearly, I have talked enough for the moment. It's somebody else's turn. Let me see whose turn it is to. Melissa, did you read on Thursday? Melissa, did you read on Thursday? Melissa's going off to have coffee. Janice, did you read on Thursday?
No, I didn't.
Okay, wonderful. So Janice, you're going to now assist me in this thing by picking up with some of this stuff to see what some of those duties to account are. And then we will go forward, beginning with the particular interests.
Okay. The particular interests of capital beneficiaries of remainder and income beneficiaries and life tenants are critical in directing trustees to properly manage, invest, and account for trust funds under their care. The competing interests of these two types of beneficiaries are fundamental to determining how investments are directed at any one moment and to the extent to which trust assets are mobilized and invested. The trust instrument is the primary document which governs trust accounting and the trustee's decisions regarding the proper apportionment of income and expenses in the administration of the trust. The relevant fees and expenses to the trust are paid from income or capital of the trust, depending upon their nature and the financial condition of the accounts. Section 89 of the Trustee Act of 1998 gives the trustee the discretion to apportion income and capital in a fair and equitable manner in the circumstances. Section 89 has effectively abolished the common law rules of that word that I can't pronounce.
Apportionment.
Giving precedence to the trustee's discretion and exercising his judgment in particular circumstances, which require a decision between the competing interests of income and capital beneficiaries. However, Section 89 of the Trustees Act of 1998 also gives beneficiaries the opportunities to apply to the courts in cases where they may feel they have been unjustly or unfairly treated by the trustees in exercising their discretion in relation to
Apportionment.
If the trustee is found to have acted in good faith in his discretionary apportionment, he will not be personally liable for legal costs of the beneficiary's actions against him, and the payment of trustee costs in the action may be charged to the income or capital of the trust or to both, as the trustee decides, or alternatively, as the court directs. The terms of the trust instrument will be taken into consideration in reviewing the trustee's action under under section 89 of the act. If the trustee was found to be simply acting in accordance with the terms of the trust instrument, then he will be treated more favorably by the court, as he would simply be complying with the instructions provided in the trust instrument.
Thank you very much, Janet. So let's back up a little bit and see if there's any meat in what she just read. And there is, in fact, there's a whole lot of meat in those paragraphs, especially from a trust accounting perspective. Let's see what some of those things look like. Notice she began by saying that with regards to trust accounting, that we have to take into account the capital beneficiaries or the remainder men. Now, have you guys come across that word before? Remainder men?
Nope.
My. That's an interesting word in the trust world. In general,
I think we went over it in the first course, the first half of this course.
yeah. Anybody remembered from the first part what we said remainder men were?
I think it's the way that I put it together is like when it comes to a trust, you have a primary beneficiary or beneficiaries and a secondary beneficiary sometimes. And that would be the person who, after the primary beneficiary is no longer there, they're the ones that remain. So they're the ones that inherit or receive what's left to get.
Yeah, that's interesting way to look at it, but it does define remainderment from that perspective as well. Yeah. The word remainderment comes from the word remainder. And we know from grade 4 math that when we did a math class, for example, a particular type of math problem, we'd say remainder 3. Anybody remembers that? 12 remainder 3. Sounds like a typical division question. And by the way, apportionment, that word, apportionment, has to do with division. Hence, no doubt, the existence of remainderment as well. And remainderment has to be with those beneficiaries who are, like she said, left, quote unquote. Okay? And what she means by left is that before the remainderment can benefit in any form or fashion, the income beneficiaries must be benefiting for the entire life of the beneficiary or beneficiaries. And once the income beneficiaries are passed on, and anybody connected thereto to that income, then what is left in the trust will go to the what we call remainderment. Okay? Or another term for remainderment are capital beneficiaries. And the accounting for these assets, capital, income, etc., is part of what we refer to as trust accounting, because all of these things has to be duly accounted for, categorized appropriately, and dollar values attached to them. Okay? Hence the issue of the duty of the trustee to account. So, some
I
of,
have a question.
yes,
What happens if the remainderment pass? The deed will have to speak to that. What happens to the asset?
typically it would.
Okay.
Okay, if there's, let's say there's only one remainderment, right? Sometimes there are 2 or more or many, but let's say, keep it simple, there's only one remainderment. The remainderment dies before the income or life tenant dies. What happens to the remainderment share? Well, typically, a trustee might say that in the event of the death of the remainderment, the issue of the remainderment, meaning the remainderment's children and even grandchildren, will benefit. Do you follow? So the remainderment might pass on, but typically provisions will be made for the remainderment's assets to be divided between their children and maybe even their grandchildren, depending on the settler's position. Okay? So that's a good question. It's a very valid one as well. Right? What happens? Because if provisions are not made in the trust deed for the issue of the remainderment to benefit if the remainderment dies in the process, then things can get a little cranky and may have to end up in the courts to make a decision. Okay? By all means. All right, remember we said, as we said in our first session, when all else fail, where should we go for a decision? Anybody remembers when all else fail in a trust dispute, where should we go for a decision?
The outcome.
Court?
The act is part of the process, but when all that fails, when the deed fails, the act fails, the only
Yeah.
that go to the courts. And that's a
Gotcha.
final conflict. Whatever the decision the court makes, it supersedes the bloody deed and the act. How about that? So, like everything else, whenever possible, try to keep things out of court unless you have absolutely no choice. Or you feel for sure you can win. Because once the court makes a decision, of course you can appeal, but one way or the other, that decision is final. Right? So, this accounting for the interest of remainderment, also called capital beneficiaries, and income beneficiaries, also called life tenants. And these are synonyms you want to know. I mean, not go to bed and dream about them, but certainly the important synonyms to know that capital beneficiaries are also called remainderment, and that income beneficiaries are also called life tenants. Because oftentimes trustees in discussions refer to them interchangeably. And if you only know one part of it, then you may not be clear if you see the other names. Right? So, in considering these issues on behalf of the beneficiaries, the two types that we talked about, the trustee now has to go and make sure that all of the interests of the income and capital beneficiaries are properly managed. And as we saw before, invested and the funds accounted for. The trustee can't say, well, we lost $1 million, we don't know what happened. That's not going to fly. It's easy to just say we made a mistake and reimburse it from your own money. But try to defend it unless you have, I don't know what your defense can be. Better be a good one as far as accounting for those trust funds. And you may or may not know that income and capital beneficiaries in the real world tend to compete with each other, believe it or not. You might wonder, well, why would they be competing? What's the deal? Shouldn't they be happy to getting something? No, they're not just happy to getting something. Human nature is a strange thing. They don't care if they're getting millions. If they think that more money is going to income than capital, then they're going to make noise. If they think that more capital is going to income or vice versa, they're going to make noise. And if you don't respond to them appropriately, they will sue. Take it to court. Say, look, we believe that more is going to income beneficiaries than to the capital beneficiary account, or vice versa. And then, as usual, the courts will review it, and the judge, in his or her great wisdom, after looking at all the quote unquote evidence, will render a decision. And we know that, for better or for worse, that decision is typically, I know. Okay? So yeah, there are competing interests with regards to accounting for trust assets and how accurately and how appropriately the trustee accounts for these assets is critical for peace and quiet within the organization from a beneficiary's perspective. Okay? All right, so that's the first thing Janice talked about. The second thing that you mentioned was something that we've seen in regards to investments and any other issues. Because Leah, always, she said earlier, like, man, I'm reading trust deeds all the time, sick of reading them or whatever. But the trust instrument, again, for trust accounting is the primary document, which governs the trust accounting process. Notice not the debits and credits, the process of accounting for all assets. The financial accounting side is just converting the money side of it and presenting it in a readable, understandable format. But in terms of the legal responsibility for trust accounting, the trust documents, now that you know there's a legal side, which we're discussing, and then there's a financial accounting side, which is taking the numbers and putting them together. Two different but interrelated functions. So, once again, the trust instrument is the governing document, the trust accounting as well. And the trustee's decision to apportion between income and capital should be governed first and foremost by the deed. Not your discretion. Your discretion would probably come later. Unless, of course, the deed says you have the discretion. And if the deed says you have the discretion, then you may exercise your discretion immediately. But if the deed does not give you that discretion and state clearly how you should account for those income and capital issues, then you are bound by the deed. Doesn't matter how you feel. Doesn't matter what you think is right or wrong as a trustee. The deed governs first. Okay? Typically, the deed will tell you that fees and expenses of the trust are paid from either the income account or the capital account. See, trust accounting. And whether we pay from income or capital is very important, because if you have an expense of the trust, or whatever the expense might be, and you keep charging to income, or you keep charging to capital, what do you think the beneficiaries in those two categories might start thinking, anyone? All of the expenses being charged to income, or all of the expenses being charged to capital. What do you think is going to happen with these competing groups? Put yourself in their shoes and come up with an answer immediately. What do you think will happen?
They will be upset because their funds are being used.
Yeah, they'll be upset. The same upset that caused Cain to lick Abel in his head or whatever he hit him with. For whatever reason, they become upset. And trust me, you haven't seen upset until you start doing things that beneficiaries think you shouldn't do, trustees. Okay? You guys may not have encountered it yet in your young careers, but those persons who've been in the trust world a while, they can tell you some interesting stories. Okay? So the apportionment of expenses to income and capital is crucial. And so the trustee must make sure that the accounting people or the decision makers at the committee table in terms of these apportionments. Remember, sometimes these apportionments might be a few hundred, few thousand, or they could possibly be a few million, depending on what the apportionments are that are being made to income and capital. Does anybody know what apportionment means? Apportion? That weird word, what does that mean? I don't mind if you Google it. Google the devil out of it. What does apportion mean?
To divide up and share out.
Yeah, to divide and share. Okay? Funny little word, but that's all it means. To divide and share. I'm sure everybody in this class is well aware that dividing and sharing is not always a simple process. Even little children in preschool experience great difficulty without even realizing it, because they don't even know they're alive. But dividing and sharing. Try and get the two preschoolers to divide and share, and you'll see some interesting things. Because preschoolers and little children only know one word, mine. And mine does not go well with divide and share. So imagine at the possible multi-million-dollar trustee level, what divide and share is all about. All right. So this is a big deal, this apportionment side of the accounting process. Right. The other thing she referred to in section 89 of the Trustee Act, and feel free to consult that particular section, 89. It said, and this is a very crucial section of the Act, as far as accounting is concerned, anyway. Okay. As a matter of fact, I think, who's the trust accounting in our class again? Is that you, Janice? Who's the trust accountant?
Yes, I work on the accounting side.
Yeah, and so this conceptual side of things is very important for you to grasp, because now while you're doing your financial accounting, you're not just doing it in isolation in a little silo somewhere, following all the generally accepted accounting principles with regards to assets and liabilities and capital and all that stuff. You are now aware of this legal side, which is actually designed to govern your activities to some great extent. And so now, if you are doing the financial accounting for something, and something comes up, then you might, all of a sudden, you're gonna raise a question they're not gonna expect you to raise, like, excuse me, folks, in this meeting, are we doing the apportionments to income and capital correctly? And they're like, what the hell's wrong with Janice? Shouldn't she just be putting the numbers in and making it balance? Well, that's the Janice from last week. Now we have a Janice from this week who is now raising other questions like apportionments, like income for the benefit of income beneficiaries and capital for the benefit of capital beneficiaries, and whether or not the organization is accounting for them appropriately. Good luck with that, Janice. I wouldn't want to be you. Okay, but I'm making the point that it's designed to be a benefit to you, if only the fact that you have that additional information in your repertoire. How about that? To work
Yeah.
with. as you
Yeah,
go.
I mean, well, now it makes sense when you have to do distributions and you know where to take the funds from.
Absolutely, absolutely. My point exactly. Okay. So in case you say like, oh God, I could have been sleeping, don't worry about it. You're definitely where you need to be. How's that? All right. So section 89 talks about the trustee's discretion. Now, folks, remember, what do we mean by the trustee's discretion anyway?
Their ability to make the decision on what needs to be done.
Yeah, the trustee's ability. They consult the deed, because the deed gives them the discretion. And discretion means that once the deed gives you the discretion, it means it's a discretionary trust. And once you have a discretionary trust, you make the decision as trustee as to what you think is best to do. Now, if it's a non-discretionary trust, then you don't have any discretion. Every decision you make must come from the deed. Doesn't matter what you think. So, under section 89, trustees have the discretion from an accounting perspective to apportion income and capital in what we call a fair and equitable manner in the circumstances. How about that? Modern trust law. Okay. Notice we are told, in case you were not aware, she was reading, that this section in the modern trust law in this jurisdiction and others effectively abolishes the what?
The common law.
The common law what?
That governs how things are apportioned to the trust.
Yeah, yes. It effectively abolishes the common law rules of apportionment, giving precedence to the trustee's discretion and exercising his judgment in particular circumstances, which requires the decision between the competing interests of income and capital beneficiaries. What that really means is this. Under the old common law practice, the trustee did not have such discretion. And to some extent, sometimes this discretion leads to a lot of discourse and disagreements. Because sometimes some trustees don't exercise or use the proper discretion. See my point? In the real world, under the old common law practice, the trustee says specifically, these are the things that should go on the income, and these are the things that should go on the capital. Nowadays, under modern trust law, the trustees are not restricted by those trust deed restrictions anymore. They can use their discretion. So, for example, if a trustee decides that they don't want to be fair and equitable, they can charge more to income to the disadvantage of the income beneficiaries and less to capital to the benefit of capital debt beneficiaries, or vice versa, especially if somebody who's an income beneficiary they hate and somebody who's a capital beneficiary they know, they like, they something. Now, notice the academic world that we're discussing does not talk about personal relationships between trustees and beneficiaries. And for good reason, I suppose. But do not be mistaken to think that personal relationships do not exist between some trustees and some beneficiaries for the benefit of those beneficiaries who want the benefit that they shouldn't get, just like anything else in the world. Some beneficiaries get close to trustees. Some trustees get too close to beneficiaries. Sometimes they get so close to each other, neither one could breathe. And when these things happen, like everything else, discretion becomes compromised. That's not in the text, but it does exist in the real world. Okay? All right. And this is what we mean by this discretion, if not properly exercised, can lead to a lot of problems, which it has. Not always, but all too often in the modern trust world. Okay? The old common law is what you might call more stringent and more directed and more instructional, just like the old generation of Bahamians, as opposed to new Bahamians who say, whatever buck up, let it go. This is a modern world. We all do whatever we please. And who doesn't like it? Jump in Lake Kalani. How's that? All right. So section 89 is a very critical section. Please have a look at it when you get a moment to see exactly how the act articulates it. But at the end of the day, you'll see that it does give discretion to the trustee. Anybody in the modern trust world who challenges as a beneficiary or otherwise, if the trustee is using his discretion under the guise of the Trustee Act, section 89, and it goes to court, very likely the court will look at the act and say, okay, this trustee acted appropriately under the act. Now, acting appropriately under the act doesn't mean that that was the best decision. It's just acting appropriately under the act. And for the law, that's sufficient, generally. Also, interestingly enough, while the section 89 gives the trustee the discretion, it also gives the beneficiary an opportunity to what? Sue. The beneficiary under the same section can go to the courts and say they feel that their stuff has been unjustly accounted, unfairly treated by the trustees, and exercising that discretion of apportionment. Remember, divide and share? Divide and share is not always as simple as you think. Families fight, people kill, argue all the time over divide and share. Apportionment. If the trustee, notice, very important, because you don't know when these cases are going to come. Trustees need to be very aware. Same section 89 that gives you the discretion, gives the beneficiaries the right. Very interesting that they're in the same section. If the trustee is found to have acted in good faith, according to section 89, in his discretionary apportionment, see, you cannot just apportion however you feel. Your apportionment process has to be seen to have been done in good faith. If you can prove that to the courts, you will not be personally liable for any costs, including legal costs. However, if it is found that the trustee by the courts, doesn't matter what the trustee thinks or anybody else, if it is found by the courts that the trustee did not act in good faith by apportioning the income or capital as presented by the beneficiaries, then the court will direct and decide. And whatever costs are involved, the trustee will have to pay out of his own funds. Notice, once again, just like in trust investments, the trust instrument will always be consulted when these matters come up. First, then, based on the contents of the trust deed, the courts may then look to the Trustee Act and the relevant sections to make a final decision. So basically, if the courts find that the trustee is acting along the correct lines in good faith, not a problem. The courts will look favorably upon that decision and move forward. Of course, the opposite is true. If you cannot convince the court that you acted in good faith, they are going to rule against you, Mr. Trustee, and you will have to pay up. Okay. All right, thank you very much, Janice. Jessica, are you there? Jessica Clark. Jessica's having coffee. So that takes me back. Tanya, are you there? I saw Tanya earlier. Tanya is somewhere. So, Lovette, are you there?
Yes.
Okay, Lovette. Jessica is somewhere. Tanya is there somewhere. Until they respond, we're back to you, Lovette. You will have to pinch it.
Jessica is here, sorry.
Jessica is there. Okay, Jessica, how are you?
I am okay. Sorry, I had to make a run, but I'm back.
No problem at all. So what you can do then, you can pick up from Janice, right under, I think it's page.
I'm sorry, Mr. Wilkerson, but I don't have my book. My book is still in my luggage.
Oh, I'm sorry, you're the one.
Sorry. Yes, sir. So I'm just really listening in today.
Okay, answer, yeah,
Okay.
I just
All
remember you're the one that flew in from Waikiki.
Yes, that's exactly where.
Having fun. We all hate you for that, by the way. Okay?
I apologize.
Don't need, we hate you anyway. This time. All right, good stuff. I hope you enjoyed it.
Yes, I did.
Lovely, lovely. All right. What I need to do.
I can read, Mr. I can read. I didn't read last week.
Okay.
Oh, on
who's-
Thursday, sorry. Alicia?
Alicia. Okay,
Yes, sir.
lovely, Alicia. Why don't you begin then with, in addition to section 89?
Okay. In addition to section 89, sections 12(2), 18(2), 24(1), 27, and 30 of the Trustees Act 1998 also give the trustee the discretion to apportion between capital and income, or each one exclusively with regard to certain income and expenses related to the trust, subject to any contrary terms in the trust instrument.
Before she goes on, Alicia, some of you may be wondering, like, what's the big argument with this trust accounting thing about the distribution of income and expenses to income or capital? You have to bear in mind that these expenses of the trust are not all little itsy bitsy, like for some couple $100. Some of these expenses are thousands and tens of thousands of dollars, depending on what comes up. Whether it's insurance expense to cover the coverage for the asset. Let's say the insurance premium is $50,000. And the trustee in his discretion tells Janice, Janice, put all of this to income. And now Janice has done this class, so she thinks she's, oh my God, put all to income? So she goes back to her boss and says, but Susie or John, why are we putting all to income? I said, what do you mean, Janice? I said put it there. And then Janice comes back, but I realized that under section 80, she's sending emails under section 89 of the Trustee Act. I'm aware that we can actually apportion the 50,000 between both income and capital. And in my opinion, as the accountant, I think we should give consideration to whether we should put all of this, charge all of it to income, or charge all of it to capital, or some to income or some to capital. What do you think the response might be to that email, Janet? With you getting into it after you've been instructed?
Well, it might not go over too well, but then based on the act, they wouldn't have a choice but to look at it.
Absolutely. And any well-thinking boss, instead of getting pissed off with Janice, would say, you know what, she has a point. Maybe they were not aware of that. Maybe they forgot. Maybe they never knew. Or maybe they knew full well and know exactly what they're doing. They're charging it the income or capital because they hate the people who get who there. Some personal issue. It could be any number of those things. But whatever it is, it will certainly give them the opportunity to look at it again before a final decision is made that could potentially create a problem. The question is, will Janet have the nerve to raise it? When I said Janice, any Janice, and bring it to the table. Because sometimes bringing even the truth to the table can cause people to get really stinky and mess with people, even if it's the truth or the right thing to do. Which is why so many important things that go undone, because people are made afraid to bring it. You want this job? Don't second guess me again, Janice. I said do it. On it. Or else. Or whatever, playing games with important things. All right, just a little real life stuff that's not in the textbook. Okay, Alicia, keep going.
Okay. The Trustee Act 1998 is specific in describing which circumstances in the administration of the trust should income or expenses be apportioned to capital or income, or both. Section 90 of the Trustee Act 1998 statutorily defines the trust fund for the purpose of apportionment. Under Section 25(1), any amount for insurance proceeds received from the destruction of trust property should be charged to capital, and the provisions of Section 26 of the Trustee Act 1998 allow the trustee to charge income for the safe custody of trust documents. The primary consideration, whether the apportionment is directed by the terms of the trust instrument or by law, is that the trustees act impartially, fairly, and equitably in apportioning income and expenses related to the administration of the trust.
So you see, even the act itself seeks to give a little direction to help with the discretionary application of these accounting for trust income and trust capital. Notice they go as far as to say, if you receive insurance proceeds from destruction from the insurance company, let's say maybe a building is involved, which is a capital item, the proceeds from the insurance company should go to capital because the capital item was destroyed. On the other hand, if we charge income, let's say the bank says for keeping these assets in safe custody, it's X amount. Safe custody items are considered part of the day-to-day income operation, and therefore that particular cost should be charged to income. So again, this is an attempt in accounting properly for the apportionment of capital and income even the act itself seeks to provide some guidance and to give direction to the trustee in terms of how their judgment should be exercised, their discretion should be exercised. Okay, okay, keep going, Alicia.
As an instructive guide to trustees, profits from proceeds of sale of land, stock, or capital are apportioned to capital, and interest on cash, bonds, and loan receivables and cash dividends are apportioned to income in the trust.
Did you hear that, Janice?
Yes, I did.
Yes. So now while you're doing your accounting going forward now, if you see anything like contrary to those things, you're like, really now? We never did this like that before. We didn't apportion it quite like that before. And so now you have to decide, am I going to just leave it and pretend I didn't do this class and continue with business as usual, or you are going to be the bold accountant, not bold, the correct accountant, and raise the question about whether or not your company is actually apportioning appropriately. Okay? And these guidelines are very effective defense mechanisms for you, Janice, in case you come under fire. Like, who do you think you are, raising questions about what we've been doing for the last 15 years in here, Janice? And then you could say, well, I appreciate you've been doing it for 15 years, but according to this, we should be doing it like this, because that is the proper way to apportion into account under these conditions. Okay? Good luck with that, Janet. Keep going, Alicia.
Recurring expenses are apportioned to income, while fees for agents retained by the trustees may be charged to income or capital or both, depending upon the circumstance and the trustee's discretion. The need for accurate accounting of trust funds is significant. In order to avoid overpayment or underpayment to beneficiaries, and to ensure that the requisite funds are available to meet the requests of both capital and income beneficiaries. Proper and timely accounting of trust funds allow the trustees to exercise their discretion and make important decisions based upon factual, up-to-date information, and to strategize and make future plans with regard to the investment, preservation, and profit.
Yes, hold, so stick a pin, Alicia, a moment again. So you see, this accounting for trust assets, making sure that the records are current, making sure that the numbers are correct, and certainly making sure that expenses and returns and proceeds are charged or capitalized to the appropriate income or capital accounts is absolutely crucial. Every trust should be making sure on a regular basis that they are properly accounting for income and capital, expenses, assets, whatever proceeds, etc., needs to be added or subtracted from those particular categories, that the correct additions and subtractions are coming from the correct categories of income and capital. Very, very crucial, because modern beneficiaries now have their accountants. So they have their lawyers looking at investments and other legal issues. They have their accountants looking at whether or not these apportionments are being done correctly. So when you send a beneficiary a financial statement, a capital and income statement, they're not just like, yay, we get this amount of money every year, I'm rich again for another year, or whatever the case might be. They're looking at those other details. What's being deducted from their income? What's being added to their income? What's being deducted from their capital account? What's being added to their capital accounts? And remember, if you're a life tenant, which statement are you looking at the most? Anyone? Which financial statement are you looking at the most if you're a life tenant?
Would it be income?
Of course. And if you are a Minderman, which statement are you looking at the most?
Maybe capital?
The
Income as well, eh? No?
Yeah, but more so than the income. Which other statement are you looking at the most? If you're a remainderment. The capital statement, remember that one? Remember there are two statements. The income statement and the capital statement for the income beneficiary and the capital beneficiary. Now they're both looking at both statements to see what is what and who is who. Because remember, an income or life tenant might look at a capital beneficiary's capital statement if they're allowed to see it, which is an interesting point. Question for the class. Should an income beneficiary be allowed to see a capital beneficiary statement?
No?
Generally, the answer we would think should be no. Now, I wonder if there's any provision in law that provides for the no.
Wouldn't they be able to see the statement because the statement shouldn't actually detail like who the money is going to, or just kind of thing?
True, to some extent, it doesn't necessarily say who the money is going to, but there's other information that might be sitting on an income and capital statement that might arouse the curiosity. For example, if the capital beneficiary got a statement last year that says the total capital was 15 million, and then they get a statement this year and the total capital is 12 million, what do you think they're going to do? They're going to say, well, why did it go down by 3 million? Similarly, if a capital beneficiary sees an income beneficiary statement and they see that income was down last year and up significantly by an additional 3 million, the capital beneficiary might think, well, that 3 million might be my money that should have been added to me. That was, see, any number of things can happen. That's the point I'm making. So even in all of these legal and documentary requirements for the accounting of the apportionment of income and capital, whether or not these statements should be seen by all the beneficiaries is actually an important point to consider. And you don't hear a whole lot of discussion about it outside of the venue, but it is an important point, and I'm sure, like the thing Leah said, we don't call the names of the beneficiaries per se in the financial statements, but that doesn't mean that beneficiaries are not looking at other variables in an attempt to make a determination as to what's really going on. Because remember, because the company is a trust company doesn't mean everybody trusts each other. Doesn't mean that beneficiaries trust trustees all the time. Doesn't mean that trustees trust beneficiaries all the time. Do not think that in the real world, it's as nice and romantic looking as it is in the academic world. It never is. Okay. All right, keep going, Alicia. Trust accounts.
Okay, trust accounts. When a trust is created, it is important to establish the date in which the annual statements for the trust will be based. This date will be the date in which the annual statements will be based for the duration of the trust. However, the financial year of the trust may change due to a major change which occurs within the trust. Example, the death of the settlor. Under the Trustee Amendment Act 2013, a trustee of an express trust must maintain reliable accounting records in relation to the following items. A, all sums of money received and expended in relation to the administration of the trust and the matter in respect of which such receipts and expenditures takes place, inclusive of all sales, purchases, and other transactions. B, the assets and liabilities of the trust.
In other words, every time the trust makes a transaction, no matter what type of transaction, whether it's an asset purchase, an expense, a revenue from proceeds, whatever the transaction is, those transactions have to, first of all be recorded. They have to be recorded correctly, and they have to be apportioned correctly. Otherwise, sooner or later, some beneficiary who has an accountant that they have on retainer will come to you with for a discussion if they have any concerns, guaranteed. All right, keep going.
In order to be considered reliable accounting records, Section 2 of the trustee should be
Yeah, it
A,
should-
correct,
Yeah, section 2 of the trustee amendment, blah, 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 A.
should A, correctly explain all transactions. B, enable the financial position of the trust to be determined with reasonable accuracy at any time. C, allow financial statements to be prepared. D, include the underlying documentation, including invoices, contracts, and receipts necessary to facilitate A, B, and C.
My mind, yes, keep going.
Additionally, there is a documentation retention requirement for accounting records and any related documentation under the Trustees Amendment Act 2013. Trust account records must be retained for a minimum period of 5 years for an express trust. Failure to comply with this minimum statutory requirement will result in the trustees of the non-compliant trust being liable for a summary offense under the Act and punishable to fine not exceeding $2,000.
Now, before Alicia goes on, this retention requirement, I hope everybody understands why we have that retention requirement. It's just like the retention requirement for compliance and any other documents. In the event that there's a court order or a call for those documents, they can be accessed and produced. That's primarily the reason for the retention, the minimum retention period. Is that $2,000 enough for non-compliance? For a big old trust company, like a multi-million-dollar trust company? Is
It
that
really
enough?
isn't. I don't think it is.
No,
Like, where did we get that little stinky number from? Yeah, anyway, that's just me, yeah, out of the box. $2,000? Man, those guys they spend more than that from petty cash each week. They must not need money in the treasury, whatever government it is. Okay, keep going.
The legislative requirement for the preparation, establishment, maintenance, and retention of trust accounts under the Trustees Amendment Act 2013 is an important accomplishment for offshore trusts, particularly those established and administered within the Bahamas. The financial position of the trust is able to be clarified and established at any given time with accuracy and timeliness, and the duty to account by trustees to beneficiaries is further supplemented by the amendment to trust legislation in the Bahamas. Trust accounts are based upon a cash method and not on an accrual basis, which means that liabilities are not accounted for unless and until they are paid. One of the important issues by note with trusts, which own assets through underlying companies, is that dividends paid by the company and received into the trust are considered income. However, Section 89 of the Trustees Act 1998 allows the trustee to apportion the dividends he receives between income and capital. The trustee, as a legal owner of the underlying company, may elect to declare and pay dividends out of income in the trust. The balance of the dividends should be added to capital and recategorized as a part of capital. Section 89 of the Trustees Act 1998 allows the trustee to overcome the legal limitations of general trust accounting within acceptable conditions and directives imposed by statute.
Thank you very much, Alicia, for that. I think those of us hearing these conditions which govern the accounting for trust assets. If you didn't have a perspective before, you certainly have one now. If you had a perspective before, you have a little more insight now. And despite all the blah, blah, blah under modern trust law, a lot of the old common law practices have been removed. The good old stuff that kept things stable have been replaced by the modern things that sometimes create some instability and discomfort. But welcome to the modern times. All right. For example, the fact that trust accounts are based on the cash method in generally accepted accounting principles, Janice and other accountants will tell you, like myself, that while the cash method of accounting is allowed and not outlawed, that the preference under generally accepted accounting principles for accounting is the accrual basis of accounting. And one of the important aspects of the accrual basis of accounting is making sure that all liabilities of the company are properly accounted for and projected into the future when necessary, such that when stakeholders pick up a financial statement, they're not only looking at the transactions in cash as they occur, but they're also looking at transactions that have occurred but have not yet been paid or satisfied, which is the accrual side. So if you have a cash basis and you owe money, you will not see that in the cash basis financial statement, which is a big problem. But trust accounting under modern trust law allows for the cash method and does not insist on the accrual method. I have said many times before in my capacities as an accountant, including in the trust world, that while you are allowed to account on the trust basis, the ideal process for trust accounting would be the accrual basis. And any trust accounting department that is using the accrual basis is probably opting for the more reliable basis, even though the cash method is accepted. Okay? But that's only an accountant's perspective. From a non-accountant's perspective, the cash method will obviously be touted, say, hey, we don't need to go through all the problems of trying to account for liabilities until they become necessary. We'll just account for things as we pay. And that's it. Okay? So that's just a little more insight for you guys who are not accountants, just to be aware. Okay. Also, is these dividends that are paid from underlying companies that are controlled by the trust. In other words, somebody has a business, they put the business in trust for the long-term benefit of their beneficiaries. The business operates like any other business, as it always has. The only difference is the shares of the business are held by the trust. And of course, the beneficiaries will be named in that trust who will benefit from any activity or residual value, such as profits, that come out of the company. Now, whenever the company pays dividends, since the shares are held by the trust, the dividends are paid into the trust, and then the trust will distribute those dividends according to the trust deed, the settlor's wishes, and the normal trust activity. The problem is, and the question is, when these dividends come into the trust from the underlying company, should we apportion them all to income, all to capital, or some to income, some to capital? Profits in the form of dividends that come into the trust under common law would typically apply to income. Nowadays, under modern trust law, as we are told, trustees have in their discretion the ability now to apportion dividends not only to income, but some of it also to capital. And I guess in some bizarre cases, all of it to capital, which can cause a fight from the income side if they see or find out that dividends have been all charged credited to capital and nothing to income. They would want to know why. And again, the rich lawyers that they have on retainer will step in and start raising challenges. Okay? Interesting concepts from a trust accounting perspective that has nothing to do directly with the financial accounting side, but it does impact the financial accounting side when it's time to report all of these different things in numbers and in their appropriate classifications. So for people like Janice, who's been involved in the financial accounting side, she must be thinking, this is all very interesting. Now I see what some of those discussions were about, what some of the questions were about, what some of the concerns were about, what some of the gripes from beneficiaries were about. And she goes back to her office to see what Monday will bring. All right. So Section 89 of the Act, very significant part of the Trustee Act, talks about the legal limitations of trust accounting and those conditions that are acceptable under the statute or the law. Very important for every trustee to be aware of it, every trust officer to be aware of it, and even, of course, every trust accountant, by all means, to be aware of it. All right. So now, having said all of that, we come to the issue of trust income, which will be followed by the issue of trust capital, and it's fitting that discussion on trust accounts should come to an end with these two discussions. Okay, trust income, after all of the legal ramifications and potential problems and discretions. So Levette, are you there still?
Yes.
Okay, Levette. By the way, did Tanya answer yet? Alicia said I'm here.
No, Tanya is Alicia.
Oh, Tanya's Alicia.
Yeah, she underneath that.
Stop the madness. No wonder Tanya is Alicia. All right, 1 second.
No, Alicia, same person, that's me.
So Alicia is not Tanya.
No,
So who is Tanya? Is Tanya in the room? Okay, Tanya is somebody else.
Because,
Okay,
yeah, I thought when
Alicia,
read it,
you have
brought up
your
Tanya.
name as Tanya. That thing.
okay.
what? Okay, let me see.
Oh, Alicia's name is Tanya in this thing. Do you see, Alicia?
Oh, what happened is today I'm on with my company's phone, and this phone was Tanya's phone.
Okay,
Okay.
yeah. So you can see.
Yes. Okay. Yeah, it was Tanya's phone already.
So yeah, essentially computers are quick, but they're not smart. They only smart, isn't it? If you don't change it or fix it or make this,
Yes.
there you go. There you
Okay.
So while we give computers all credit, that's nothing that they're smarter than we are. Okay, for sure they're not. All right, way to go. Because I had Tanya as another student who just didn't show up, Alicia. How about that? Okay,
My bad.
no problem. No problem at all. Completely understandable. All right, Levette, you ready?
Yes.
Okay, trust income.
Trust income. The income of the trust fund may be obtained from interest on deposits, dividends, rental income, and loans. These items will be calculated as the gross income. Capital gains, which are derived from the sale of trust property, are not classified as income for the purposes of the trust and are therefore not distributed to the income beneficiaries. Important considerations to be made in relation to the income from trust property are: 1, the power of the trustees to accumulate or retain income. To the extent to which income may be paid or used for the benefit of special beneficiaries with specific needs, that is, physically or mentally challenged beneficiaries. 3, the beneficial interest which may be entitled to income. 4, the proper accounting of gross income and extent to which this income may be distributed to the relevant beneficiaries.
Hmm.
Income in a trust may comprise of royalties, interest on cash and term deposits, cash dividends, rental receipts, mortgages, interest on bonds and debentures, and any other receipt which are not considered capital.
So Janice,
And-
you see, sorry, so Janice, you see, now if you are having any concerns whatsoever, which I'm sure you probably worked through most of them, but just as a backup, if you were still not sure, like, what are the income issues we should consider for income accounting? Here is an example of the kinds of things you should be looking at. And if you have been classifying them otherwise, I say you, I mean anybody doing the accounting for whatever reason, you now can go back and say, wait a minute, we didn't put this under income for some reason. Why and should we? And when? Okay. All right.
Okay.
Yeah, keep, so there's some little, just little food for thought there and looking at some of the key things that are considered to be great for income and not great for capital. Remember though, while this is being stated under modern trust law, we have an antithesis which says that while these are being presented as income items, let's not forget that under modern trust law, as opposed to traditional common law, trustees can now, in the appropriate jurisdictions, like the Bahamas and the Caribbean and others, can go ahead and where some of these traditional income items that are being presented can actually be classified as capital for some reason. So that's interesting, Janice. Just throwing that out because you like the trust accounting practicing. Yeah. All right, keep going.
In calculating the gross income of a trust, it is important that the expenses attributable to income be deducted from the gross income to obtain the most accurate figure. Expenses attributable to income are defined as those of a recurrent nature, which are payable from the income subject to the provisions of the trust instrument. These expenses include, but are not limited to, recurring expenses in the administration of trusts and the protection and preservation of trust property, expenses for the management of the trust related to income generation, etc., and expenses related to investment management and other tasks related to income generation.
So again, sorry, Leah, again, for the purpose of Janice and trust accountants who are actually practicing this stuff on the accounting side, the financial accounting side. These are just guidelines to show you the kinds of expenses that you should consider as income expenses to be deducted from gross income before you make the application to the income beneficiary. All right, so, and again, so if you have any concerns about what kind of items constitute income expenses, this is a beautiful guideline. I'm not suggesting it's exhaustive, but it does have some key stuff in terms of determining whether you're following the correct classification of expenses that need to be deducted from income before you credit income to the income beneficiary. My. Keep going, Leah. And for those of you who are not accounting persons in the trust and fee environment or accounting persons at all, welcome to a little touch of the trust accounting side of things. Okay? Keep going, Leah.
Do you want me to start reading or continue with
Yeah.
Levette?
Yeah, no. Sorry, Levette. Sorry, not Leah, Levette.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Additionally, interest related to mortgages, loan payables, repairs and maintenance of rental properties, trustee fees, legal fees, and expenses related to matters concerning the income in a trust, insurance premiums on trust property, except those protecting the interest of remainderment,
I remain the man.
losses of property caused by income beneficiaries and income taxes may be charged to income.
Thank you very much. So this is a guide to the accounting for trust income. And an effort has been made here to give guidance to both accountants and non-accountants in the trust world in terms of how to properly classify income and expense items. The key point that was made at the very beginning, before we credit income, gross income to the income beneficiaries or remainderment, or life interest beneficiaries, we have to first deduct all of the relevant expenses from that gross income, and then what is left, we credit to the income beneficiaries. We are also told, be careful, don't put any income stuff, expenses, or revenue to the capital that shouldn't go there. And then, on the other hand, we are given some guidance on what should go to the capital account. And so, unless the trust instrument says something contrary, and typically it will not to any great extent, these are the kind of rules on trust income, and anybody who's making a management decision or anybody who's accounting for trust assets and expenses should take these things into consideration. Okay. Term deposits and dividends and rental receipts and mortgages and interest on bonds, etc., and debentures and investments, all of these things are not considered capital items. These are considered income items. And so to put any of them, even though, again, remember, under modern trust law, we have the discretion to put some of these under capital. We have to be very careful how we do that, because it might distort the position of the income beneficiaries and the position of the capital beneficiaries. And if any of the two discover for whatever reason it's happening and they're not happy with it for whatever reason, they come in with their lawyers as usual. Always. Remember, modern beneficiaries are much more likely to sue for even what we think is the slightest thing, because it's a different generation of beneficiaries. Okay. Notice any interest related to mortgages held by the trust, loans that are payable by the trust, repairs and maintenance, etc., rental property, blah, 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 legal fees, all these kinds of expenses that impact the income of the trust are typically charged to income, with a couple of exceptions. Okay. Any kind of transaction that protects the interest of the remainderment, for example, should be charged to the capital account. Other than that, typically, if it's an income item that's connected to income in any form or fashion, these should be charged to gross income before they are credited to the capital interest, the income interest, or that of the life tenant. So that's a little guide for those persons who have to know, need to know, would like to know, and by coincidence run into any of these discussions. This is the guideline typically that we should be looking at and helping us to make decisions about how to account for trust income. Okay, very important. Any violation of these guidelines can lead to incorrect information impacting both the capital beneficiaries and the income beneficiaries, neither of which goes well depending on the situation. Okay. And so finally, we have the trust capital. And Leah, why don't you finish up the day for us, reading the trust capital? Let's see what falls under this category.
Or
The very last item, trust capital.
trust capital may be distributed to the beneficiaries named in a fixed interest trust or or those whom the trustees exercise their discretion to distribute in a discretionary trust. Capital will often be distributed to those beneficiaries entitled after the expenses related to the capital have been paid. Expenses related to the protection and preservation of the capital in the trust fund are known as capital expenses and may include those expenses which apply to the trust generally or is considered capital expenditure on the trust assets. The capital expenses may be the principal of mortgage payments on trust property, substantial improvements to fixed assets such as land or buildings, and professional brokerage fees for certain stock transactions. For accounting purposes, the principal of the trust is comprised of the original trust property, inclusive of interest accrued up to the date of transfer, any additions to the principal which the settlor may have transferred, or from accumulated income added by the trustee, insurance proceeds from the loss of trust property, stock dividends, and any profits from the sale of trust property. Capital losses on the sale of assets, which comprise the principal, capital gains, taxes, brokerage fees on the trade of capital assets, repairs and maintenance fees to preserve trust property, major permanent improvements to real property, trustee fees, expenses, and legal fees related to matter concerning to the principal may be charged to the capital or principal of the trust. The distributions of trust capital or principal to the capital beneficiaries or remainderment must be properly accounted for by assessing previous capital distributions as well as outstanding loans and advancements to beneficiaries so that there is no overpayment or underpayment to beneficiaries who are entitled.
Thank you very much, Leah. So you can see, very much like trust income, trust capital has the same conditions. There are very specific transactions that are credited to trust capital, very specific expenses that are deducted from capital before we add it to the trust capital to increase it. And we must be aware of those that they're actually laid out here very specifically to give you a very good idea. So you have no confusion as to what represents the income side of things on the trust accounting and the capital side of things. The key is to make sure we differentiate between the two first and foremost. What is trust income? What is trust capital? Once we do that, then we have to look at this information. So you don't try and figure it out in your head. I mean, if you could, fantastic. But look at this thing and say, hey, what is trust income? What is trust capital? Then remember that before you charge anything to income or capital, you must deduct the relevant charges or expenses connected to income or capital. And then the net income, net capital is then credited to the income or capital account. But we have to be very specific and very clear on what is income, what is capital, what is income expenses, what are capital expenses, so that we do not cross them over and create, first of all, incorrect accounting, and secondly, potential discourse with capital beneficiaries. Because remember, I told you, they are always looking with their lawyers and accountants, waiting to see which trustee they can possibly devour. That's an old trust joke, but it's true. Okay? If you read some of the legal issues pertaining to trust, even in the last year alone, I wouldn't talk about the last 5 or 10 years, you'll see that there are huge amounts of litigation in and around the world, but primarily by beneficiaries against trustees for one reason or another. And the nature of the trust accounting, as it is with investments and other issues, are no exception to the amount of inclusiveness in lawsuits by beneficiaries. All right. Any questions then before we break for today? Remember, please go ahead, the self-assessment for accounting. Please go ahead and do that. When we meet on Thursday, we will go over the responses for the self-assessment, and then we'll move into unit 3 of our discussion. What is our discussion again? Anybody remembers? I think it's unit 8.
Special assets and underlying companies.
Sorry, say that again, Janice?
Special assets and underlying companies.
Yeah, special assets. How about that? If you think assets were just assets, think again. Special assets and the work and implications of underlying companies that are controlled by the trustee. All right, so that should be an interesting diversion from our discussions on investments and trust accounting so far. So when we come back on Thursday, same time, we'll have that discussion to see what other nightmares are out there for the trustee and all the other responsibilities connected there too. But that's okay, because trustees make a whole lot of money depending on size and type from administering the trust. And so these responsibilities are just all and sundry part of the work that needs to be done in order to generate those fantastic trustee fees. All right. So you guys take care. Remember, if you have any questions or issues, you have my email, my contact. Feel free to send a note. I'll be happy to respond. Until then, I shall see you on Thursday. Please take care, and I'll see you then.
Good day, thank you.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you. Good afternoon.
Take
Good
care.
afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Afternoon. Take care.